So in terms of learning from marketing, a famous quote from about 100 years ago is that half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. Now I think very, very true for probably 90 of the last 100 years. I think the interesting thing is with digital marketing, so thinking of Amazon and all the things that now follow you around, showing you that pair of shoes you looked at 3 weeks ago and how the price of that's just changed slightly, you might be really interested in them now. I think increasingly marketeers are able to tell you exactly which half of the money they spend is producing results. And I think it's that thinking and that process that should be adapted much more into the recruitment process, so you can tell where are you spending, what results are you getting, so where could you spend more to get more of the better results. So I think this quote is now starting to change, and part of that is because of the kind of developments within the digital marketing field. So there are various different versions of this marketing funnel, but they all basically come back to the same thing, which starts with businesses trying to create an awareness and make sure that you know of them and who their brand is and what their products or services are. Base level, do you know what a company does? And then let's say with a pair of shoes, because we all need shoes, let's say so you're aware of a couple of brands that you like. As you start to go in and look at the shoes and maybe go a couple of times or check out if they've got your size or not in stock at the moment, they register that you've now shown an interest. They can then see you coming back and they know that you're now demonstrating a consideration and that you're going to effectively in the end come back and hopefully purchase. And what they're doing all the way through that process is working out what messages to what kind of activity that you're taking result in the most people going through to the next stage each time, so that ultimately you might increase the through flow by a couple of % from awareness to interest to consideration, but by the time you get to the sales made at the end of it, you've grown your sales hugely because you've taken care of the kind of the little stages of getting people through the buying process. So the recruitment funnel works pretty much the same. There are slightly different variations on how you would define the stages, but I would say that the first stage is about attraction. For any role, you want the most number of people who could do that job to be aware and to show that kind of initial interest. And I would say the application stage is almost the defining moment of how much good attraction you've served up, is how many applicants you get. And then as you walk through the process, you might do an original screen, which might give you a long list of the people who broadly can do this job and live within an area that means that it's feasible. And then you might do some assessments. And again, I've worked for video interviewing companies and things like this. I'm not here to really talk about all the different assessment items, but I think some of those were discussed in the previous session and what you might be able to use to get to your shortlist. Then we've got interview stage, potentially selecting the right people, making an offer and hiring. And we spoke on here about assessment centres and how you can cram maybe 2 or 3 of those stages into one morning and end up getting a really good outcome in terms of the people you're going to maybe make an offer to, but kind of cram the screening, assessment and interviews into a particular geographically and time sensitive session. Learning from kind of consumer marketing, digital marketing, by and large consumers now are very well adapted to beginning their search on an aggregator on a site that provides them with the biggest possible collection of relevant opportunities for them. And I think the key here is that none of this is particularly new. You're all consumers when you're not on duty here, and your candidates are all consumers day in, day out when they're not applying for your jobs or your competitors' jobs. They're consumers as well. People are absolutely comfortable with the concepts of going and finding the place that has the most things of interest and then starting to whittle that down quite quickly to the ones that are most interesting for them on that occasion. So behaving in a way that allows your candidates to behave like the consumers that they are the other 23 hours of the day is absolutely what they expect, and it's a behavioural trait that people are very, very familiar with. It's not something new, different and scary. It's really tapping into what people do day in, day out. On the flip side of that which consumers are 100% comfortable with, the advertiser, the marketeer, it has now got to the point where they are entirely comfortable with only ever really paying for interest that is shown by a candidate to their product. So you're not paying for a billboard to kind of go up and you can't have any idea as to how many people have seen it and who's taken any action, etc., etc. they now know that when someone clicks on a particular advert or a follow-up piece of information, they can relate that back to where the candidate first saw that, where the consumer first saw that, and they can put a price on that, and they can start to say, okay, that is worth X pence to us in terms of going through the funnel, and when we make this many sales, we know that that first interest was stimulated from this activity. And I think being able to join that all up is a really key element, because if you've got big gaps in understanding as to where people come from and what their value is to your process, it really becomes difficult to kind of do anything significant in terms of joining that all up and really being able to test new ways of doing things, because you don't know what the previous result was. Just in terms of this room, or certainly the people who expressed an interest to be in this room, who might not all be here today, but the total number of jobs that you declared that you were looking to hire was 55,000 this year, so broadly in this room. So I think as the point that was made in the last session, anything that you, across 55,000 jobs between all of you, any small, relatively small changes you can make a huge difference when you multiply that by that many roles. So it's about trying to do, impactful things well to be able to help you to see the benefits across vast numbers of jobs. We tried to have a bit of a think about what might the problems be, and one of the challenges with a session like this is, between the 35 of you here, even the 3 on the table just before the coffee break, you've all got different challenges, different things that are affecting you, so it's very difficult to stand here and try and capture all of them. But things like unfilled roles, things like, overlong process, slowing down the system and perhaps losing good candidates, things like spending, inordinate amounts or relatively inordinate amounts of money to get certain candidates. These were the things we suspected might be some of the challenges, and having sat in this seat for 30 minutes before the coffee break, they definitely seem to be, the right kinds of areas. What you've got to do, and I think this came through in the previous session, was identify 1 or maybe 2 key areas that you know are your main challenges, and start to try and focus on how do we solve that, and really try and focus your time, attention and resource into solving one thing, a major thing at a time, rather than getting lost in trying to solve every problem under the sun. It's far easier to concentrate on one and try and deliver on that. We put together an example of how that funnel might work. Now, clearly, most of you are recruiting in much higher volume than this, but I felt an example with smaller volumes, you can always add a couple of noughts if you need 500 acceptances. That's easy for you to do. So I was thinking of something like, we've got a hotel opening up over here, so maybe you need 5 staff to work the reception area, something like that. So the way that you would work through, and I would really strongly encourage all of you to try and get as close to this as you can, because if you don't know the actual details, you have some blind spots. It's very difficult to then try and do that working out from the bottom back up again, because you've got blind spots and you don't quite know what the ratios are. So as you come down the funnel, obviously you're trying all the time to whittle down the candidates. I don't need to tell you, but very aware. Clearly, most of the people who apply are going to be unsuccessful. You're almost in the not in the acceptance game. You're in the getting rid of people game. That's part of the process here, is to manage people successfully out of the system who are not going to be successful for you. I would say that as you go through the funnel, there is a sort of an exchange of almost sort of emotional energy. If someone just applies, you can probably deny or reject their application relatively straightforwardly. But I think once you've got people into sort of short lists, maybe long list, but you're starting to ask them to put their time and effort into things, I think that feedback and the way that you get them out of the system, if that's what you need to do, I think you owe that candidate a little bit more, and you need to think about how do you give them that information, and perhaps even some feedback as to why they're not making it through the process. Can you do that relatively quickly and cleanly? But if they've invested sort of time, energy and effort and emotion in thinking, I might go and work at this company, I think you've got to try and find a way of letting them down gently and giving them something back, because they may well be your excellent candidate for the next role that you have in, or the next time you're hiring for that kind of role, and you want them to have exited your process feeling good about your brand, not feeling that they've been sort of muscled out the corner, especially if they've come down towards the bottom. Anyway, just to sort of look down the cost side, clearly the cost for eventually hiring people. In this example, you might end up spending £800 on some advertising and some promotion, and you effectively end up spending about £600 per hire in this example. Now, no one in this room is going to say that's exactly me, well done, but hopefully it has some, it makes some sense. And I think the key from learning from that marketing side and now moving into measuring it is beginning to know for your key roles or the key areas where you know you need to start to look at it and make some changes, understand what the process is and what your metrics are so that you can begin to look at where you can improve those. So I would say that the key things are what are the stages in your process, what can you measure, and it might be you need to add some layers into measuring it. But if you make that investment to know what you're measuring, it does make a big difference to how you're able to solve it. Look for where the blockages might be. We've talked about a few previously. Prioritise. Don't try and solve every single thing at once. Decide what the first or two main things are that you need to solve and try and clear them first and then work out what comes next if you're successful in clearing them. Don't get bogged down trying to solve the world's problems all in one go. Take it step by step. Look at the options you've got to improve. Could it be training? Could it be assessment centres so that you can speed things up and still get a good result without having to get all your hiring managers on different days to do different interviews with different people? Is there some technology that might be able to help speed things up? There usually is. It's usually not massively expensive, or at least there's an opportunity to use it for a relatively small cost to start with most tech providers I've come across. So could you test these things and see if they start to provide an ROI? Do them one at a time and then adapt, improve and repeat. Get to the end of the process, see what has changed from the adaptation you've made, and then say, do we want to go and run that again? Or now that we've fixed that, do we want to move on to a different problem? But it's very much a kind of a stage-by-stage approach to just trying to work out where your problems are and take one approach to fix it and see whether that works or not. And because you've taken all the measurements, you can see what the impact is. That's the key.